I think we can all agree that advertising and marketing is the product of some Satan spawn who was just so evil they were actually thrown out of hell because they freaked out the rest of the demons.
A handful of people working at a handful of technology companies will steer what 1 billion people are thinking today.
I used to work for an advertising agency as a graphic designer, and I really had to give it up because it's just kind of like creative lying.
Because once we had your attention, we're very good at keeping it. And the longer we can keep it, the longer we can sell advertising against it.
Individuals who are neither elected nor removable have the capability to alter and impact our daily lives.
So we manipulate customers to buy more, buy faster, and buy again.
But most marketing impedes rational decision-making, and in turn makes the world worse. Or in other words, most marketing is evil.
What if I told you that most of the thoughts that you have long believed to be your own were actually never yours? That the central myths upon which you have based your entire identity, the way that you see yourself as a person, are in fact usually manufactured and incepted within you long before you ever even realized it. Not because someone slipped something into your drink or swung a pocket watch in front of your eyes as if you have been hypnotized, but because someone got there first and named the thing before you could feel it cleanly. You woke up one morning, you felt an exhausting yet ambient dread, the kind that hums under fluorescent lighting and follows you into the shower. Someone called it burnout. You felt guilty for saying no to that socially draining party. Someone called it boundaries. You wanted to buy something nice for yourself, but not look like the kind of person that would chase labels. Someone called it quiet luxury. You started paying more for objects that promised you to make you feel like the kind of person who had their life together. Someone called it wellness. You weren't decorating your apartment. You were curating a space. You didn't want status. You wanted to become the kind of person who no longer needed it. You felt the particular ache of being alone in a room full of notifications and decided to expose yourself less to it. Someone called it self-care. Nothing inside you changed. No new organ, no new instinct, no sudden mutation of the soul. Only the vocabulary shifted. And then something unsettling happened. Once the word arrived, the feeling reorganized itself around it like it had been how you felt all along. The advertising industry is roughly a $1 trillion industry, and it perhaps operates on the same fundamentals. It isn't trying to convince people to buy toothpaste. It is trying to redefine what a confident smile means. It isn't selling running shoes. It is selling discipline. It isn't selling coffee. It is selling mornings. It isn't selling perfume. It's selling desirability. It isn't selling insurance. It's selling the feeling that responsible adults need to sleep better at night. Advertising stopped selling products a very long time ago. It realized that selling identities was considerably more profitable. One of the strangest things about being alive is that most of us never notice the exact moment someone else's language becomes our inner voice. Nothing changed. A vocabulary arrived. The vocabulary reorganized the experience. The experience became a product. The product became a version of you that you did not exactly choose, in a font you would have never picked, with a color palette that somehow became yours. In 1929, Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, which should tell you everything you need to know about the century that followed, by the way, convinced American women to start smoking by calling cigarettes torches of freedom. He hired socialites to march in the Easter parade, lighting up publicly, and issued a press statement declaring that the women's liberation movement had found its symbol. The press covered it. Women started smoking. Philip Morris was very pleased. He called what he did public relations. The older term, propaganda, had recently gone through a bad PR campaign of its own. Bernays understood something his uncle had theorized, and he had monetized. What you call a thing determines how it is received. The mechanism was identical regardless. Locate an existing desire, give it a name that sounds like a value, attach a product to that value, repeat until the product and the value feel inseparable. He did not install a new want in American women. He told them what their existing wanting was called. And once it had a name, freedom, liberation, progress, it could be lit and held between two fingers, available in 20 varieties. There is an entire genre of essays that begins here and ends with advertising runs the world and you are a puppet and the strings are invisible. I have read many of them. A lot of them, however tinfoil coated they might seem, are entirely justified in the accusation that they lay. I might have even spent a decade professionally inside the thing that they are describing, and I think that they are almost right, which is the most interesting kind of wrong. But before we get to the almost, if you are going to believe that the machine is controlling you, you should at least understand the scale of what you are accusing. The mid-20th century produced what its practitioners called, with complete seriousness, the science of motivation research. Actual psychologists on actual retainers at actual advertising agencies applying the same frameworks used to treat anxiety disorders to the problem of making you buy more soap. They had decided with some justification that selling things and understanding the human mind were not fundamentally different projects. They were right. They billed it to the client. Logic does not stop where it is useful. It migrates to wherever the money is. Political campaigns began hiring the same people who sold soap to sell candidates. The insight that moved you towards one brand of shampoo, your unexpressed fear, your aspirational self, worked equally well in a manifesto. By the late 20th century, the distinction between a political party and a consumer brand had become mostly typographic. Both had focus groups, both had agencies, both opened their briefs with the same question: what does this person fear, and how do we become the answer? In some countries, this was called governance. In most, it was called elections. The results were similar. The infrastructure of desire management spread further. Spiritual figures discovered that the apparatus, the audience building, the message testing, the careful calibration of accessible authority, applied equally well to salvation. Institutions that once derived legitimacy from tradition or wisdom found that they could also derive it from a consistent tone of voice and a well-managed presence. God, in the late 20th century, acquired a communication strategy in several of his regional offices. The results were mixed, but the engagement was strong. And then, the part nobody, including the people inside advertising, can fully explain. You have probably had this experience. You mention something out loud in a conversation, not near a screen, not near a search bar, and then saw an advertisement for exactly that thing within the hour. You told yourself it was a coincidence. You mentioned this to whoever you were with. Neither of you entirely believed it. Here is the part that should actually disturb you. The advertising industry doesn't entirely know either. The people you imagine as the architects of surveillance are for the most part themselves operating in the dark. They buy data from platforms, but the platforms only show them the data that the platforms want them to see. Metrics chosen by the platform optimize for conclusions that the platform would prefer the advertiser to reach. The conspiracy theory imagines a room full of sophisticated operators with full visibility. The actual room contains people staring at dashboards that they did not build, interpreting numbers they cannot fully verify, drawing conclusions they will present with complete confidence, and billing all of it to the client. When the thing is free, you are the product. You have heard this. You felt the truth of it the way you feel the truth of something you cannot fully explain and yet cannot fully dismiss. Somewhere, the EBITDA and the numbers seem to make sense. To someone, not us. A conspiracy requires competence. The more honest analogy is politics. From the outside, politicians appear corrupt, coordinated, pulling strings in concert. The reality is far more depressing. They are equally inept, equally siloed, genuinely unable to see beyond their immediate world. All the cogs moving differently. None of them knowing they are part of a machine, let alone what the machine is supposed to do. Which is why the machine doesn't run. And then we wonder why. Nobody has the dashboard. However, everyone has a dashboard of their own. The CMO has a dashboard, the platform has a dashboard, the agency has a dashboard, the media buyer has a dashboard, the research firm has a dashboard. Each one shows something different. Each one was built to display what its builder wanted measured. Not the marketing head who has not spoken to an actual consumer in 3 years, but describes the target audience with the intimacy of someone who raised them personally. Not the creative director who believes with complete sincerity that the current campaign is the one that will finally say something true. Not the strategist who spent Tuesday morning constructing a 6-slide framework for why people emotionally engage with biscuits. Not the research firm that validated the insight with a sample size you would be embarrassed to cite in a school project. Not even the media agency, which has the extraordinary precision about where your money went and almost no idea what it did when it arrived. Ask 5 people why a famous campaign changed anything, and you will receive 5 different and mutually incompatible answers. All of them are probably true. None of them is sufficient. The causality cannot be isolated. It may not even be isolatable in principle. Advertising may be the only trillion-dollar industry where almost nobody can honestly explain why a specific piece of work worked. We share this distinction with economics and astrology. I want to be fair to astrology here. At least the astro girlies never claimed their methodology was replicable, only inevitable. The economist explains after the crash why it was obviously going to happen. The astrologer explains after the breakup why you were clearly incompatible. And similarly, the creative director explains after the campaign underperforms why the media mix was insufficient. All 3 are reading the same system from different dashboards. All 3 will bill you for the insight. Personally, I don't know why that gentrified meme post on the brand's Instagram page is going to increase sales for an insurance company. I suspect that most advertisers know the answer they are supposed to elocute as the rebuttal to this point, but I don't think they actually know. The evil industry as you see it is for the most part full of people who are all pretending to know with articulate precision and insight why what they do works. A few rounds of honest questioning will have you arrive at a realization that their understanding of this subject is perhaps as vague as yours would be on the topic of why airplanes are able to stay in the air, or why ships that are literally made out of thousands of tons of hard metal are able to float. You might offer some keywords like buoyancy, airlift, and similarly, you will hear them say brand love, ROAS. The machine runs, nobody is steering it. This should feel more terrifying than a conspiracy. A conspiracy at least has a villain you could theoretically confront. What we have instead is a machine that nobody designed for this purpose, that nobody fully understands, that produces outcomes nobody specifically intended, and that runs on the willing participation of everyone inside it, all of whom are doing their jobs correctly. The real horror is not that someone is manipulating you. The real horror is that everyone is and nobody is simultaneously. You need to understand how this advertising industrial complex actually operates before calling it the second incarnation of the devil. Because the version of advertising that the conspiracy theory imagines, intention at one end, compliant consumer at the other, a straight line of manipulation, is not reality. The reality is something more like a game of telephone played between people with mutually incompatible goals, all of whom are pretending to have the same one. The brand team enters the process with a business problem, usually something like, our sales are declining in tier 2 cities, and converts it through the alchemy of internal brand workshops into a moral statement about their product's place in the universe. The biscuit is not a biscuit. The biscuit is a cultural artifact that links us to our history. The brief then moves into the agency, where the strategy team converts the client's conviction into an insight. A word that functions in advertising as a kind of open source certification for any observation about human behavior, however obvious, as long as it is phrased with sufficient confidence for others to buy into it. The insight moves to the creative team, who convert it into concepts. What the creative team actually wants to do, however, is get a shortlist at Cannes. Not in spite of what this does for the brand, but regardless of it. The concepts go back to the client, where they are reviewed by people who were not in the original briefing and who have absolutely but equally strong feelings about what the brand should say and not say. Legal reviews it, finance thinks that everyone is just torching money. Something is always lost, usually the thing that made it interesting. By the time the brief arrives at its destination, it has passed through so many sets of hands and intentions that no one in the room can trace it back to the original question. I don't even think this is unique to advertising. Every institution, government, education, healthcare, the law, operates by the same mechanism. An original intention enters the process. It passes through hierarchy and bureaucracy and competing interests. What emerges at the other end is the aggregate of everyone's separate wants. This is not a conspiracy. This is something far stronger than a conspiracy. A conspiracy at least has someone at the center who knows what is happening. So then the question becomes, what happens when a civilization outsources meaning? For most of human history, the people who shaped desire were the most important people in a civilization. Priests, philosophers, poets, kings. They held institutional power precisely because it is not a peripheral function. It is the central one. And then, at some point in the 20th century, this function was transferred, not ceremonially, not with proclamation. The philosophers of yesteryear are today's copywriters. And nobody told the copywriters. Before you conclude that this makes advertisers a profession of compromised people, failed artists taking commercial assignments because the original dream did not work out, I want to ask you to hold that thought. Because the arrangement you are describing dismissively is the oldest arrangement in the history of civilization. Michelangelo did not paint the Sistine Chapel because inspiration struck him on a Tuesday. He was commissioned. Akbar's court painters did not spend their careers rendering the Mughal world because their light was beautiful. They painted what the emperor wanted preserved, what the court needed to believe about itself, what power wanted to look like when it looked at itself. The Medici funded Florentine art not as philanthropy, but as the exercise of a specific kind of power. The power to shape what a civilization believes about itself and what it considers true. Great art and institutional power have always occupied the same bed. The artists who found this troubling painted it anyway. They had rent. What changed is not the arrangement. What changed is the face behind it. For most of history, the patron had a face, a theology to illustrate, a dynasty to glorify. The Sistine Chapel tells you something precise about what the Catholic Church believed about its own relationship to God, because the patron had convictions and wanted them made manifest. The art said something specific because the patron believed something specific. The market is a patron without a face, without theology, without a specific vision of what is sacred. The market has no taste. It has signals. The measurable preferences of millions of transactions that add up to something resembling a direction, but operate more like a weather system. Somewhere right now, there is a grown adult earning 8 figures a year, trying to crack whether the voice of an animated scarf should be that of a man or a woman's. It wouldn't be uncommon to see 12 intelligent adults huddled in a conference room. People with real children, opinions, EMIs spend an entire Tuesday afternoon debating whether changing the brand display picture on X during Pride Month would elicit a positive brand perception. Or rooms where 45 minutes were spent debating the services of a voiceover artist with what was described as an internationally vague accent, so that some jury member from Peru at an international advertising awards festival wouldn't have to endure what was repeatedly referred to as an indecipherable Indian accent. Or even brands who literally pay strangers on the internet to comment enthusiastically on their posts as though they had independently discovered something wonderful. There is even a name for this practice, and the name is perhaps as grotesque as you think it is: seeding. Nobody in any of these rooms thought anything was absurd. This is perhaps the most disturbing thing I can tell you about what happens when meaning making becomes a profession. But here is the thing about desire itself. If you got most people in advertising on truth serum and added for good measure Wonder Woman's lasso of truth, because the profession has developed impressive immunity to ordinary honesty, they would reluctantly admit the following: I have never managed to create desire, not once. I have never reached into a person and manufactured a want that was not in some form already there. I might have made things visible, made things urgent, made existing desires feel not only permissible but admirable. But the desire itself, the hunger for status, belonging, love, safety, the feeling that your life is coherent and has shape, None of that was installed by anyone. It arrived with the person petty-packed. What advertising actually does is not create desire. It manufactures self-interpretation. Nobody told you to want lemon water. Somebody taught you how to read lemon water as wellness, as ritual, as evidence of care for your body, as the specific kind of person who does this in the morning before checking their phone. The desire to feel well existed way before the word wellness existed. What the word provided was not the desire. It was the framework through which the desire could be understood, named, and this is the important part, satisfied by a specific set of products that had been waiting for exactly this vocabulary. Advertising simply industrialized the process, gave it quarterly targets, made it available in 12 languages and 2 aspect ratios. And to mix in a final dash of irony to this absurdist soup you've been consuming for the past few minutes, most people in advertising vocally advocate against the use of AI. At the exact same time, most people in advertising are enthusiastically using AI to do their entire jobs, promoting the model, celebrating the efficiency. They've labeled it working smarter even. There is something genuinely strange about a profession actively accelerating its own replacement, while publicly insisting it is irreplaceable. Though I should add, this is not unique to advertising. The programmer building the coding assistant that will eventually do their job better. The lawyer training the legal AI that will eventually make their billing rate indefensible. Everyone is building the exit door. Everyone is hoping that nobody notices that the door is already open. Honestly, we've now pointed a finger at the empire for long enough in this essay. Now perhaps is the moment to pick up a mirror yourself. Because guess what? For all the things we have just seen advertisers be blissfully unaware of, here is one thing that every advertiser knows with certainty. Everyone is an advertiser today. The logic of advertising escaped the agency sometime around the first time we mistook spectacle for an exception instead of recognizing it as a strategy. Not the agency as a building, the idea of the agency, the proposition that you are a brand, that your life is content, that your opinions, your grief, your recovery, your moral positions are products to be packaged, positioned and distributed to an audience you are simultaneously constructing and performing for. This did not happen because advertising corrupted culture. It happened because advertising spent decades practicing something that turns out to be a fundamental human impulse. The need to be seen, chosen, preferred, remembered. The industry did not install that need. The industry noticed it first, built the infrastructure, and then handed the infrastructure to everyone. The claim was advertising runs the world. The claim was also quietly the bait. The version that is both more precise and more uncomfortable is that the whole world became an advertisement. We didn't become consumers, we became campaigns. Advertising doesn't run politics. Politics became advertising. Candidates are positioned. Constituencies are targeted audiences. The manifesto is a campaign, focus grouped, refined, delivered in a font that someone chose to signal trustworthiness. Dating became advertising. You are a 32-year-old product launch, positioning yourself against infinite competitive alternatives for a target audience of one. The profile is creative, The opening message is copy. The photo is a hero shot you took 17 times before choosing. Rejection is a bad click-through rate. You are trying to build brand love with a person who is simultaneously trying to build brand love with you. And neither of you is using that language, and both of you know that something strange is happening. And authenticity, the value explicitly positioned as advertising's opposite, the proof that you had escaped the machine, became a brand territory. Authentic became an aesthetic. So did Bharat. Unfiltered became a filter. The machine has never met a critique it could not eventually sell back to. Every institution eventually learned that attention compounds faster than the truth. The tinfoil conspiracy theory was almost right. It was not that advertising ran the world from behind a curtain. It was that the world gradually and then completely began to operate by advertising's logic. Not because it was strict, because the logic, be seen, be chosen, be remembered, turns out to be one of the oldest and most stubbornly human impulses available. Here is what I have come to believe, which is not what I expected to believe when I started to write this. Humans have always wrapped desire. They have always needed, with some urgency, for their wanting to be given a shape, a theology, a myth, political project, an aesthetic, a brand. The wanting itself is ancient and essentially unchanged. What changes is the institution responsible for giving it form. For centuries it was the court, the state, the dynasty. For a brief and interesting period it was philosophy, then art, then literature. Now it is, among other things, advertising. And now increasingly, it is everyone deciding which moments constitute the version of themselves they would like to distribute, finding the language for their particular variety of human longing, packaging it, sending it out, watching to see if it lands. This is not the end of something. It is the continuation of something much older than we are comfortable admitting. The institution changes, the patron changes, the medium changes, the impulse doesn't. In truth, we have all become professional packagers now. We are the gift wrapping of the universe. Except, what we are gift wrapping is desires, disguised as products, disguised as desires.